A lesson from the book of Proverbs. Wisdom has built her house, has hewn her 7 pillars. She has slaughtered her animals. She has mixed her wine. She has also set her table. She has sent out her servant girls. She calls from the high places in town. Come, eat of my bread and drink of the wine that I have mixed for you. Lay aside immaturity and live. Walk in the way of insight. Our response is portions of Psalm 34. Fear the Lord, you who are his saints, for those who fear him lack nothing. Young lions lack and suffer hunger, but those who seek the Lord lack nothing that is good. Come, children, and listen to me. I will teach you the fear of the Lord. Who among you loves life and desires long life and prosperity? Keep your tongue from speaking evil and your lips from lying words. Turn from evil and do good. Seek peace and pursue it. Our epistle is from Paul's letter to the Ephesians. Be careful and listen how you live, not as unwise people, but as wise, making the most of the time because the days are evil. So do not be foolish, but understand what the will of the Lord is. Do not get drunk on wine, for that is debauchery, but be filled with the Spirit. Sing psalms and hymns in your hearts, giving thanks to God the Father at all times for everything in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ. My husband's parents were enjoying their first year of snowbirding in Lake Havasu, Arizona, and then commuting to Missoula, Montana, when Kevin and I first started dating. So I did not meet them right away. What I knew about Kevin immediately is that he was a bicycle mechanic and a bicycle racer. One day he was training with other men that they're in their 20s, and they called their age bracket the Young Bucks. Later, we would go on to the Marriage and Mortgage League, and then on to the Go Daddy Go age bracket, and right now we occupy the Advil and Ice bracket, but that is another sermon. The Young Bucks bracket, many athletes were just getting used to drafting off of each other, and that means they were riding so close to each other as to resemble a flock of birds. It's kind of like in the Olympics. Have you seen this in the Olympics? Now, you may not know that cyclists are close enough to each other to give each other a pat on the back or to steal Pop-Tarts out of the back pocket of their jersey. And that's pretty close. Now, Kevin rides all the kinds of bicycles. And on this ride, it was a road racing bicycle. And if you are old enough, you might think of it as a fancy 10-speed with the ram's horn handlebars and tiny little seats. I used to tease Kevin that the seat of his bicycle was about the size of a large potato chip. This time, the training ride was past the airport into the countryside near Missoula on a freshly chip-sealed road. Now, the Young Bucks were fast. Perhaps they hit 30 miles an hour going downhill, and they were learning to move as a unit and to mind the wake. Now, a newer buck called Chris was a nice guy. He was as cheerful as sunny weather and strong. He pulled to the front to take the wind when it was his turn, and Kevin was right behind him, encouraging him when a semi-truck turned on the road in the other lane. And we don't know if Chris looked up or if he just flinched. Either way, he tapped his brake, and this made Kevin bump into him. And Kevin tried to swerve to stay upright, but he fell and his forearms were covering his face as he slid. And his bike caused 3 more riders to fall onto Kevin, and a teammate's fork broke on his back. And they slid a pile of men and metal over 100 feet on the freshly chip-sealed road. And the other bucks were able to swerve around the pile. So you know what happened. Road rash. Kevin lost most of the skin on his forearms and on his legs. He has a tool that turns a bicycle into a stationary bike. And he could sit on that potato chip seat and watch Star Trek, and then it didn't hurt as much. The rest of his limbs were close to burger. The day after the big wreck was the day I met his mother, Edna. Edna looked at me like I let him do this to himself, but it was not me. Kevin was in the wake. On the surface, Proverbs chapter 9, verses 1 through 6, reads as positive instruction for those who are seeking to live an ethical life, a life that leaves aside the nativity of the young buck and is grounded instead in understanding and insight. Ethical instruction for children often gives human characteristics to powers like wisdom, and this is called personification. Historically, it was more common to teach boys with personification. In Proverbs chapter 9, verses 1 through 6, then it is woman wisdom who invites her guests into her house to feast with her food and on her wine. Elsewhere in the Proverbs, woman wisdom calls for the reader to walk in her ways and to listen to her words. Again in Proverbs, by comparison, we see the personification of woman folly, which is a formal word for foolishness. Various chapters of Proverbs call woman folly the other woman, the stranger, the foreigner, the adulterer, and ruder names yet. And this is hard, because no one is all good or all dumb and dumber. Remember Chris, that sunny and strong athlete? Well, he did not cease to be sunny and strong, even though he flinched for a second at high speed. This personification method is harder for women, who have sometimes been treated as if they are only good if they remain adolescents and not as functional adults, with agency, with duty, and with legitimate grievances. And this dichotomous contrast is meant for instruction, but it leaves little room for growth after a very human flinch. Paul echoes this dark and light idea in Ephesians, but he is not addressing children. He is addressing adults in a tight-knit community. He knows that Rome will judge all the Christians for the actions of one, and Christians could be killed for being a bad influence on youth. Drunk on the Spirit is wisdom. Drunk on wine is folly. And Paul seems to be into a kind of a holy karaoke as a symbol of a new way of life. And if this sounds contemporary, well, it is, because some things never change. To protect kids from the stories of our favorite ways to fail is one main way to maintain an oppressive power structure. Oh yeah, we got hashtags full of our favorite ways to fail. And you can fill in the blank here. The newscast and the podcast is full of examples. Another way to maintain oppressive power structures is to blame kids for the state of the world. Fill in the blank. Kids these days. Oh man, we got memes full of complaints against children, and this is folly. Complaining instead of riding like a team of young bucks and marriaged and mortgaged and go daddy go and Advil and ice athletes. Beloved, if the solution of the problem of the day is to ask teachers to fix it, that error is probably a semi-truck pulling into the road, and you might get distracted, and the crash is going to hurt. You know, in church we tell the truth. I want an ethical life for myself, for my family, and for my community. And that is what the psalm asks. How are we going to teach each other to live a good life, knowing that our lives are as linked as the young bucks, and that road rash is the worst? The psalm tells the truth, and this is it. This is my truth. Mind the wake. Notice what you're leaving behind you. Chris, that sunny and strong cyclist, did not fall. He could have just ridden on. He could have felt like he left all of those other teammates in his superior young buck dust. He might not have noticed the pile of crumpled men and metal. Mind the wake. That team of young bucks, they could have been furious at Chris, not only for the destruction of bikes, but also for the destruction of bicycle mechanics. They could have rejected him, and that would be folly. Chris's character would have been damaged for far longer than any bike, and cycling would have been the poorer. And the young bucks didn't do that. They said chip seal is why we shave our legs. It reduces bacteria in the wrecks that are going to happen. Any one of us, Chris, could have been at the front at that moment, and that is wisdom, to mind the wake. Sometimes you got to fall back and let someone else take the wind if you're just not up for it. The last year and a bit, it was hard. And I'm in the hope business. But I had some days that I was not sure that my hope was bright enough to preach in public. So I got some advice from some older clergy that are in the dusty bike age bracket, so that I could stay on the single track of hope. You know, anyone can flinch. I knew I needed to draft on a colleague's excellence, and that is wisdom. Mind the wake. Use your injuries, your physical injuries, your mental ones, your spiritual injuries, to make the world a little safer. That is wisdom. Kevin sold more helmets that year than any other year. Who knows how many lives were saved because he looked like Burger in cargo shorts? Mind the wake. Hey, don't be an Edna. She saw Kevin's injuries, and she thought she knew the whole story without even asking, and that is folly. Few things are all good or all bad. No teammate is all wisdom or all folly, because we're all riding on the same team. Beloved, 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 mind the wake.